scale weight. When to take it, how often to take it, what to expect, what this means. Now, what I'll say, okay, when to take it. This is going to be one that you want to take first thing in the morning. There's a lot of people who are like, oh, okay, well, if I don't go to the bathroom in the morning, then I'm not going to take my scale weight. And that's something like, hey, to your discretion, if that's something you want to kind of roll the dice on, depending on how digestion actually looks, that could be problematic, because if you're someone who only uses the bathroom like 3 times a week, well, you're only going to get those 3 measurements a week, maybe. So what I tend to tell people is like, if you can make this as consistent as possible, that's going to be in our best favor. Some people, if digestion is good, I'll be like, okay, cool, take it at the same time every morning if you're pretty regular. In the case that someone's irregular, maybe there's the consideration around, can we just take it before you have a bowel movement? Can we just take it like literally first thing, like pee, whatever. But just on the off chance that digestion is irregular, at least we have that first read first thing in the morning. Now, some people, I will say, like in the case that, like for Jordan, for instance, so my boyfriend, he is currently trying to gain weight. He is not at all bothered by the scale weight with his background. I mean, he's very familiar with seeing those fluctuations. And for him, we're actually looking at the PM weight as well, which is also something that for competitors towards the end of a prep, I'm looking at, because in like the aspect of comparing PM weight to AM weight, there is a pretty consistent drop that individuals will experience. And like in the case that someone needs to be waking up roughly a certain weight, that's a data point that we can then use to kind of make decisions around that final meal, or whether or not that individual, like if we need to predict, okay, are they going to wake up lighter than they've been waking up, using that PM weight over the span of 7 days, 14 days, that can be really telling. Now, in the case of someone trying to build, do I think that you need to take PM weight? No, not necessarily. In Jordan's case, it does make sense, because he can tolerate a very high caloric intake. And then frankly, like for that, if he's going to wake up already, let's say, even if he hits everything to a T, but if he's burning through his food so effectively, and we can essentially predict, like going to bed, if he's under 200 pounds, then more than likely he's going to wake up lighter than he wants to be. So that might mean increasing food just slightly. Now, we're not doing that like on a day-to-day basis, but that is something that if it were to come down to it, if he were needing a higher intake, I guess we're not doing that regularly because it's not really necessitated, because his intake is truly as appropriate, I would say, as it can be at this point, to ensure that he's seeing that transient, very steady rate of gain. Going back to the example though, like for the individual who isn't taking PM weight, just taking AM weight, I really do think that you need to have 7 data points in a week. Sure, like for some individuals, maybe if one of those data points is heavily skewed on account of they didn't sleep well, maybe they, did fall behind on food, and like we know that weigh-in is going to be ultra light or ultra heavy. Maybe if you want to skip that weigh-in entirely, you can, but typically what I would recommend is that even if we know that there's an outlier scale weight, a scale weigh-in for the week, I would still track it. And then when you look at your average, if you're using like a spreadsheet like I am, where it's literally just in that bottom cell, like equal sum of the following rows, cool, I would just delete that one. I would just compare, like, what's the difference if you remove that outlier? So even in terms of like what to expect from your day-to-day scale weight and how that reads, off of previous days, I can tell you, I don't have a single client, I've never worked with a single client that has consistently just a linear decrease in scale weight. Like no one that I've ever seen, if they were to track weight every single day for multiple weeks in a row, no one is just consistently trending down. And that was a concept for me when I started bodybuilding that was very difficult for me to understand. Like frankly, I wanted to deny it. I didn't want to believe it. But I was one of those people that frankly, like the scale weight would influence my decisions around food day to day, which I think is unnecessary and ultimately pretty detrimental to someone who, is still in that development phase. They're still learning how to take a step back and look at the macro rather than hyperfixate on these single and very acute data points. And I think for most people, what you're going to find is that scale weight does fluctuate even when you're 100% adherent. So Even following the program exactly to the T, I would still expect roughly a range of anywhere from 4 to 5 pounds when you consider your high versus your low. Now, that's another thing in the spreadsheets that I build out for clients. A lot of people, they will get, caught up in looking at like, okay, in more of like a linear fashion. Okay, Sunday through Saturday, I haven't lost any weight. And, I'll get that in email responses. They'll be like, my weight hasn't moved. But what I'll be interpreting from what they're saying is that they haven't seen a new low weigh in. Their low weigh in is consistent throughout the week. Yet, when I look at their average, when I compare their average from this week collectively compared to last week, we can see that there is, in the case of someone losing fat, we can see that's decreasing. Now, inversely, we want the opposite to happen when we're gaining. We want the high, we want the low to both go up. But I think for a lot of people, it can be very off-putting if for whatever reason they're in a position where they're not seeing that low weigh-in over the course of 3, 4, 5 days, and they're still just looking at that low weigh-in and they're like, okay, weight's going up way too fast. The high's there. Maybe we're just like hovering in the same, 1 to 2 pounds for a couple of days, which ultimately in a build phase, that's really good. That's exactly what we want to see. We don't want to see these very acute, very rapid spikes in weight that never tend to drop off. But ultimately, the bottom line is that, like, with scale weight, if you are in a build, we have to see that go up. That is not negotiable. If you are someone who, and like I had a consult recently where someone was like, okay, but I'm looking to build and I'm not seeing the scale go down. And I'm like, those are two opposing goals. Like, if you were looking to build, the scale weight is gonna have to go up. Like, I know it's not something that you want to believe. I know it's something that you want to think, okay, we can just do this fucking like recomp and like I can look sick, I can look leaner, and like in theory, yeah, maybe to some extent there's a short period where you can recomp. But for someone who needs to make meaningful changes to their physique, for someone who really needs to grow, who needs to add a significant amount of size. And like for some people, when you think 5 pounds, that is significant. Like that is a lot of tissue to add. If you're thinking like purely muscle, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but in order to do that, that absolutely means that scale weight is going to have to go up. Even if body fat does not change whatsoever, even if body fat stays exactly the same, scale weight will have to go up. And if that's something that ultimately is the bottleneck, is the limiting factor, because like you're so tied to the scale weight going up that ultimately you're making decisions to have kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the build itself, you're kind of just wasting your time. You might as well just be in a fat loss phase, because at this point you're not really in an effective build.